Ryan Fury. Ryan Fury.
안녕하세요. 안 주무셨네요.
Get ready for the next battle.
와, 그래픽 최하로 하니까 못하겠다. 와, 이게 뭐야 이게 그래픽. 오, 안돼 안돼 안돼. 중은 할만한가?
Ryan Fury. Ryan Fury.
안 주무시고 그거요? 에휴,
Get
신경
ready
쓰지
for the
마셔요.
next battle.
하루 이틀도 아니고. 이래도 그래픽이. 소리가 너무 큰가요? 잠깐만. 정말요? 그냥 고사양으로 해야겠다. 이거 저사양 왜 이렇게까지 차르까지 만들어놨지? 일단은 사운드도 그냥 확 줄여놔야겠어요. 어차피 우리가 흔히 듣던 사운드가 아니니까. 이 정도? 와, 그래픽 설정은 진짜 고까지는 해놔야지. 수입동기 안 끄고. 잘 들리시죠? 안녕하세요, 디귿디귿님.
Ryan Fury. Ryan Fury.
오, 15분 남았네요. 14분 남았네요. 14분 개발자 스트리밍. 띄워놔야겠다. 얘네 바로 보게. 디아블로 방송 켜졌네요. 13분 남았다고 그 카운트 떠있네요.
Get ready for the next battle.
남성님은 프로필 사진이 약간 그건데? 버튜버 그 느낌인데? 약간 트위치 감성? 한판 해야지 사람들이랑.
Get ready for the next battle.
정말요? 지금은 모르는 친구라고 들리는데? 준? 오우씨, 안되미로? 오, 이거 딜게 돼? 지금. 아 말도 안 돼. 아줌마 씨. 나이스. 그렇지.
Round 2. Fight.
어우 질렀고. 와 딜캐 보소. 아니 짠손을 하시고 그러세요. 나 오늘 짬빨 할 거야. 오 가드가 좋아. 에이 이건 안 되죠. 아이고 잘못 때렸다. 아 뭐하냐. 오 못될 거. 와 내밀면 안 되는구나. 살려주세요. 자.
Round 3. Fight. 모르게 겨야 돼. 우와. 아 도망. 개발자 스트리밍 이제 9분 남았어요. 9분. Round 1. Fight.
몇 타까지 있는 기술인지 몰라가지고. 오케이. 아 왜 이렇게 콤보를 잘 못 때리겠지?
Round 2. Fight.
흘려.
Round 3. Fight.
우와. 찔러. 알겠어. 7분 남았네요. 아 근데 왜 철권 7이 더 재밌지?
Get ready for the next battle.
지나가던 철권 찌그레기 한 분 오셔가지고 말을 좀 해줬으면 좋겠다. 데미지가 왜 이래? 데미지가 진짜 도발 데미지가 왜 이러냐. 막판 존나 어렵네. 아. 아, 탱캔이 안 돼. 아, 뚜이님 안녕하세요. 오랜만에 오셨네요. 아, 이게 왜 이렇게 안 되지? 오케이, 알았어. 뭐해? 엑자일콘 봐야죠. 이제 3분 남았네요. 오늘은 시간 때울 그 중간에 비는 시간에 뭐 할까 생각 중이에요. 안 되나? 아니요, 블리자드 개발자 스트리밍 기다리고 있어요. 일단 지금 3시부터 개발자 스트리밍 이제 카운트도 없어졌네요. 자, 이제 이 조건은 꺼버리고 조건 이거를 요렇게 해놓고 어떻게 어떻게 해야 잘 보일까? 채팅창은 좀 잘려도 되겠죠? 어차피 영어만 졸라게 올라올 거라. 근데 이거 잠깐만. 오케이, 딱입니다. 오케이, 좋아요. 개발자 스트리밍. 아침 7시가 엑자일콘이고요. 지금 블리자드 개발자 스트리밍입니다. 디아블로4. 디아4 개발자 스트리밍은 방송 중에 나온 거 정리해서 바로바로 영상화 해보려고요. 엑자일2가 언제 나올지 그게 제일 궁금하죠. 엑자일 모바일도 막 나온다고 하는데 사람 새끼면은 디아블로 이모럴 이지랄처럼 안 되겠죠. 잘 알아서 해주겠죠. 일이 바쁘셨구나. 일이 우선이죠. 역시. 오, 왔다. 아이, 뭐 이딴 거 그때 봤던 거 또 보여주겠어. 어? 이게 앵글이 됐습니다. 딱 좋아요. 시작했습니다. I need you.
The malignant are relentless and without mercy. I need help. I need
You.
you.
에이, 창의력 없는 새끼.
Happy
Okay.
Friday, everyone. Welcome to another Diablo4 Campfire Chat. My name is Adam Fletcher. I am the Associate Director of Community here on Diablo. Joined here by Joe Shelley, Game Director for Diablo4, Mr. Joe Pipora, which you guys know of, and Joe as well, I guess. So, I mean, familiar faces. Associate Director for
이게 생각보다 크구나.
Diablo4, and of
다시
course,
맞출게요.
Adam Jackson. Brand new face here. He is our lead class designer for Diablo4. We have a lot to talk about today. In fact, just
이렇게
know,
기가 막혔다.
there's two Adams, two Joes, so this is going to get really confusing here. And we were thinking about like maybe we do like a battle royale or something like that to determine who talks next or whatever. But I will say we actually do have a lot to talk about. In fact, I would almost say this is like dev update.
조셜리 저 새끼 언제
Stream worthy
At
as
least
opposed
Campfire
to
Plus.
Campfire Plus. Yeah.
easily.
Plus. It was like New Game Plus or whatever.
Okay.
But we do have a lot to talk about, specifically around patch 1.
이거 지금 마우스 커서 보이시죠? 이러면 안 되는데.
Did I say enough ones?
Yeah, you did.
111? 111. Patch 111.
You did.
We are going to talk about some balance changes that are going to be coming to that patch. And of course, we're also going to be talking about the dates of when that patch is actually going to be hitting, along with when players will be seeing the patch notes, which will be well before the actual patch does actually hit, but we'll talk about that here in a second. I know we do want to jump right into it because we do have a ton to talk about.
새끼 이빨 보이네 지금.
I will
때가 온
actually throw it
때인데.
over here to Adam Jackson because I know he wants to talk a little bit about kind of like the class balance and what we're thinking about for 111.
Yeah, totally. Glad to be here. We have a lot to talk about. So,
이빨 보이지
first I
마라.
want to kind of frame this in our goals and what we're going to be doing in this patch in the immediate future, and then talking a little bit about kind of how the class team feels about classes and kind of what we're thinking in a more mid to long term space. So, for this patch, we've got a lot going on. One of our goals is kind of, I think, obvious to the community. We want to kind of improve the effectiveness and the fun of the Sorcerer and the Barbarian. So we've got a lot of changes coming in there, and I think I want to frame this in two ways of kind of what we're thinking about the Sorcerer and then what we're thinking about with the Barbarian. Because they both have, you know, kind of
원소술사
different things going on.
야만용사에 대해서
For the
얘기하고 있어요.
Sorcerer in this patch, we're focusing on reducing something that we call kiss curse mechanics, which is kind of, I know, a very designery term, but it's this idea that we give you a really cool power effect, and then we kind of take something away or make it nerfed or nerf some other part of you in some way, usually for balance reasons, to make sure that it's not just, you know, out of control and power.
Yeah, usually the idea there is like, to your point, it's like, so we really have like, you know, 20% we can afford to give you, but if we take 10% of something else away, we can give you 30% or 35% and feel a little bit better about that.
Exactly. Usually it's to sell a fantasy in a really strong way, but we can't like do that justifiably without just breaking the mechanic. But we found out in a lot of ways we've been a little too harsh with that, and so we're going to try and reduce or remove that in some cases. And then the other one is late game survivability. We know the sorcerers have
일단은
a tough time
제가
in
완벽하게 해석은 안
pushing
되는데
those later night periods,
중요한
night
거는
dungeons,
받아
dungeons.
적어보려고요.
And so we're going to
아직
be looking at ways to increase
아직은
that
그
specifically.
앞에
And
씨
an
부리는
example of that
구간이라
kiss curse mechanic is the serpentine aspect. If you know that one, it's the one where you can spawn an additional Hydra, but it reduces the duration of your Hydras. That's just no longer going to reduce the duration, it's actually going to increase it. So that's an example of something. We'll go into more detail later. For the Barbarian, we're focusing on improving the early game and making it feel better and just more fluid. We're going to be improving the Fury generation that you get from your basic skills. And then we're also looking at the late game for the Barbarian by making a lot of their uniques more attractive and effective. So you're going to see later when we go through the notes that you know, we're going to be changing around usually about one affix per unique from something that really isn't that attractive for players to something that they really, really want, which we think will help make those items really exciting.
Now, when we make changes to items, specifically items like uniques, many of these changes only take effect on new items, right? Like I think we have an example of the Hellhammer here.
Yeah, kind of. It's a little bit more complex than
용망치?
that. So we're going to delve into one of our examples
뭐가
of what
바뀐
we're
거예요?
updating here. But when we update a unique item, we actually update Hellhammer in two different ways. So we're increasing the duration that the ground is going to be ignited and burning, and then we're also increasing the damage, and that's the actual unique effect power.
저거 아무 의미도 없는 건데.
But you can see here on Hellhammer, we're also doing another change where we're actually granting you bonus critical strike damage and removing the bonus damage of crowd control enemies, right? So on the left, what you see here, when you log into the game, you know, after this patch, the left version is what you're going to get. So you're not going to get the critical strike
그러니까
damage,
우리는
the actual item affix there,
바바리안의
but you are going to get the updates to the
고유 아이템이 좀 더 값지게 사용되었으면 한다 이러면서 얘기하고 있어요. 좀 사양됐다고.
You're going to get the new affixes that you need for the item.
So new versions of
근데
the items will have all.
별로 아무 의미
New
없습니다.
versions will
저거
have
저
everything
정도면.
new, and the old versions will get the new stuff on the actual
그러니까 뭐 큰 거는
legendary
아직
stats,
얘기를 안
and
했어요,
will have
얘네들이.
the new item stats on it.
Got it. Thank you.
쥐 존만큼도
So going back
버프해놓고
to kind
저걸
of other things that we're
어디다
looking at. So
써.
that's the sorcerer and the barbarian what we're focusing on. Then generally across all classes we're doing a few other things as well. We're looking at builds that aren't really hitting a high enough power level, and we're going to be just buffing them and increasing the power of them so they should feel better and be more competitive. We're also going to be looking at increasing the attractiveness of kind of uniques across the board. We're focusing on sorcerer and barbarian for this patch, but we actually believe that we can do this kind of thing across the board. There's a lot of uniques that we think aren't really hitting the mark. It's something that's kind of a tough thing that we talk about a lot on the team, because you know the roles and the things that the uniques have as far as their item power are all fixed, right? They can't re-roll different stats all over the place. So we could very easily just make, you know, all uniques really good by putting all the best stats on the items, right? That's an easy thing to do for us. But we kind of have a push and pull there where we don't want to just make all of them clearly the best items in the game because they have all the best stats and they have really good powers.
중요한 게 나오면 귀에
Be
꽂힐
something
텐데.
that's really unique and attractive about them, and you have to kind of think of how you're going to fit these into your character's build. But we think that we are just not hitting the mark on a lot of them, so we're boosting them a little bit and then just kind of seeing how that goes. Next, we're going to be looking at opening up build-specific designs to be more widely useful. So there's a lot of effects on legendary powers and in other places where, you know, this effect only works in a very narrow use case, like only on a single skill or a single group of skills, or we're using a certain proc to get it. And in many cases, we're just going to open that up to be more widely usable, so that players can actually, you know, use them in more different builds or different ways.
알았으니까
One
내용
example
좀
of this
말했으면
we'll go over
좋겠다.
later is chain lightning's upgrade, greater chain lightning. Currently, it
양키들이 지금
bounces of
이
chain lightning do bonus damage when it bounces off of you.
별로 중요한 거 아니니까
we're gonna
잠깐만요.
change
몇
that.
초만. 양키들이 지금 채팅창으로 엑자일콘 대기방 막 이런 식으로 채팅 존나 올리고 있어요.
A lot more often now.
Yeah, it feels like a much better like lightning range skill now in that way. It's easier for me to clear packs. That's good. I like that.
Yeah, totally. So that's kind of what we're looking at for this patch.
Okay, so we talked last week about sort of our things that we want to do, like going forward in the game, other things we want to do. Not all of that stuff is in this patch.
Yeah,
right?
no, we have a lot of talks on our team. We have a lot of things that we're thinking about and going on. I thought it'd be really good also to kind of talk a little bit
뭐
about
자기네들
how we
많이
feel about
고민했다
more
이딴
longer-term
소리를 계속
goals
하고
and
있어요.
things about the game. So these aren't coming in this patch, but things that we're thinking about that'll come in the future that the team's kind of focus on. The first one is kind of finding ways to bring different types of damage closer together. As I'm sure many of you in the community know, vulnerable and crit are really, really strong right now. Kind of a lot of the meta is about
지역 피해, 극대화
you
피해
make
그런
an
거
enemy
얘기하고
vulnerable and then you do bonus damage to them and then you stack as much crit strike chance and crit damage as you can and then you blow them up, right? Our game actually was foundationally made with other types of builds that aren't only those in mind, right? We have like damage over time or dot damage, things like Firewall or Shadow Necro does a lot of this. We also have Overpower as a mechanic in our game, and these other different ways
그
to build
얘기하네.
the character.
제압 피해
We want them to
개쓰레기였는데.
have parity with, you know, vulnerable and crit damage. So we're going to be trying to find. Our goal is to find a way, and we're
그러니까
working on it right now. That all those
극대화
different ways
취약
to do
피해
damage have a lot of
처럼
parity. So no matter
제압
if you're
피해,
an overpower
지속 피해도
build or
중요해지길
crit
바란다.
build
뭐
or,
이런 식으로
you know,
얘기하고 있는
damage
것
over
같아요.
time build, you will be relatively equal in power to all of the other different types of ways to play. So another one that we're looking at is adding scaling to builds and effects that don't really scale very well in the game. This is something that I think is a big opportunity for us to open up just excitement in different builds in the game. And what I mean by this is
그러니까
we have a lot of legendary powers and effects.
잠깐 음소거하자면 얘네도 이 영어권이 아닌 나라 애들을 위해서 이제 그 눈에 보이는 아까 그 지옥망치처럼 이런 걸 많이 준비해 왔을 거예요. 이번에도 역시. 그래서 중요한 거 나올 때는 이 화면에 띄워줄 거예요. 그래서 좀 기다리면 돼요. 조금씩 알아듣다가.
A lot of these things are really good in the early and mid game when they drop, but then when you get to the really late game, they kind of fall off really hard. And what we want to do is find ways to add scaling so that the player can opt into, like making
근데
a
좀
build out of
다리
it.
한
So if I want to be an earthquake barbarian or a dust devil barbarian, I can actually do that and it's supported by.
왼쪽 다리 올리고
So that's something that
싸가지
we're
없이
really
이렇게
excited
할
about
때가
to
아닌데 이
open up
새끼 이거.
possibilities. Ultimates are kind of in this range as well. It's a more long-term goal. But similarly, you know, a lot of ultimates are really strong in the early and mid game. You take it, it blows up the screen, feels great. And then in the late game, a lot of ultimates that we see that are just used because they buff the player in some way.
Yeah, they don't blow up the screen the same way anymore.
Yeah, right. I want you to be excited to use Bone Storm because Bone Storm is awesome, not because it gives you a buff, right? Or you know, Grizzly Rage or other ones, right? So that's kind of something that we're thinking about in the mid to long term to make the game kind of open up and have more builds available.
싸가지
So we've
없이.
been talking here a little bit about sort of our philosophy here. We're about to get into patch notes. We're about to talk about Sorcerer. But we thought that it was important to talk a little bit about this philosophy, both because we want to be very transparent in terms of like how we're thinking about the game and what kinds of like why we're making changes, both so that when you see changes you can understand what we're thinking, like what we're going for, and
그냥
also so
그런
that,
거죠.
we can
어떤 패치를 준비했으며
incorporate
정확한
feedback,
내용은
community feedback
뒤에
into
얘기해 주려고 하고.
these kinds of changes.
Yeah, and that goes down even to the format for this particular
뭐
live.
지난 시간 동안
So,
고민을
we're gonna
많이
go
했으며
through a lot
이딴
of
소리 해요.
details really soon, which I think people are really excited about. I hope people are really excited about because we're gonna have a lot of those. And then afterwards, we want to hear back from the community about like how this worked. Like was this the best way to get this information? Did you get a lot of good data from us, and do you understand why we're doing making the changes that we are? Right, and to Joe's point, again, it's really useful for you to understand these things. It's going to help with the feedback that you give us back. You know, whether we're hitting it or not.
Yeah, and this is like a multi-stage type of thing. So we're actually gonna. You guys are about
그렇죠.
to see a ton of slides here in a second.
놀고만
going
있진
through
않았다
pretty
이런
much
말을
all
하고
the
있어요.
different
했어요.
detailed balance changes that are coming across. The
그리고
classes,
이 맨
but then,
오른쪽 동양계
like
이
you
아저씨가
said,
얘기할
like,
땐
we
쓸데없는
plan
거예요.
on,
그냥
releasing patch notes so that you
그냥 그 얘네들이 개발자들이 얘기한 거 한 번씩 정리해주고 넘어가는 그런 MC 같은 자리라서 진행자 자리라서 이 아저씨 얘기할 때 쓸데없는 거예요 지금.
so.
Do we know when we're getting we plan on releasing those?
So we are. Look at this. We had
I'm just
planned
asking-
this to
I'm
talk
asking
about
the
it
question.
later.
제가 감이 하나 예상하는데 이 지금 이 세 새끼 개발자 이 아저씨 세 명 레벨 합쳐갖고 150 안 된다에 겁니다. 전 돈 올릴 수 있습니다. 여기까지 안 해봤어요 분명히.
Here at the end of the stream,
Yeah.
or closer
Oh.
to the end of the stream.
Yeah, so just wait for the end of the stream. We'll talk about when that's going to go out.
But what we do want to do is we do want to jump straight into the balance changes and so forth.
Yeah.
And we do want to start off with the sorcerers. So we have a lot of different slides and changes here that we do want to detail. So Adam, I know, wants to go through them all.
Yeah, totally. So I think what I'll do is just give you a few moments to look at the screen and kind of see what we're doing, and then talk high level about some of the bigger changes here. So flickering firebolt is one we're changing firebolt to basically just generate mana when you hit an enemy. Before it was only generated when you hit a burning enemy. So when you would just try and cast firebolt, without doing anything else, you would just always
파볼
miss the first
그리고
hit of getting
연쇄번개.
That always felt bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it says negative feedback.
플리커링
loop, so it's gonna make it,
파이어볼트
feel
이건
feel
뭐야?
nice about burning things and piercing, but you just get it more often.
이거 내용 얘기하고 있는 거 간단히 해석을 해보면 플리커링 파이어볼트가 generate to mana when hitting enemy. 이거 마나 2 그러니까 적을 타격 시 마나를 2 회복시킨다 이 말이고. 아이고 넘어갔네. 어쨌든간 이거는 패시브 같죠? 패시브? 어쨌든 제가 좀 정리를 좀 빨리 해야 될 것 같아가지고 금방 캡처하고 정리하고. 이거 지금 그 패시브에 대해 버프 하는 내용인 것 같은데 대체적으로 지금 보너스 효과 딜도 늘었고 자원 회복에 좀 많이 신경 쓴 것 같고, 이것도 빨리 캡처해야 돼. 이거는 지금 파라곤 정복자 얘기예요. 정복자. 근데 원소술사 이렇게 해도 사실 진짜 인기 없는데.
Yeah, damage reduction is actually like extremely strong in
Yes.
Diablo 4.
It's really good.
레인포스 레이트 이런 거를
Yep.
무슨 뜻인지 알아도 우리가 사용하는 한글판이랑 대조해 봐야 돼요.
Alright, so
그렇잖아요.
here we've got some more Paragon nodes. Again, damage reduction across the board. Keep
일단
in mind
기본
also on some of the rare nodes you can see
일단 기본 스킬 스펙이랑 스킬 패시브 지속 효과 스펙이랑 정복자 스펙이랑 완전히 엄청 잘 다 늘려주는 것 같아요. 지금 보니까 간단히 데미지뿐만 아니라 여기 이거 전설이에요. 지금 나오는 거. 위상이겠죠. 위상.
increased your crit damage of meteor only and only against healthy enemies. So it was one skill and only healthy enemies. Now it's going to work on meteor and fireball, and you get half of the bonus.
불 소서가 되게 버프가 되는 기분이네. 그러니까 번개 구체 이것도 상당히 버프고.
It used to reduce your damage.
이거 메뉴에 있는 게 히드라예요. 히드라.
orbiting around you. Now we're going to increase it. So again, that's a pretty big switch.
히드라 하나 더 추가된다고 써 있네.
Next, we've got recharging aspect. This one was kind of similar to the change that we did to chain lightning to that bonus baseline. It used to only give you mana when it bounced off of you. Now it's gonna
근데
give you mana
내용
when it
진짜
bounces
많긴
off of
하다.
everything.
이렇게
So
해놓으니까.
again, a lot more useful. And in combination with that,
두 번째 위상입니다.
chain lightning
위상.
players are going to be eating pretty this patch. We're also increasing the bonuses of chain lightning that you get when that proc happens. So lots of chain lightning bounces. They give you lots of things. Should be really fun. We're also putting a new legendary into the game. This is the Mage Lord's
근데 지금
aspect.
여기서도 잘못된 게 이동 속도 증가에 지속 시간을 늘렸다 이렇게 돼 있는데, 우리가 원하는 원소술사는 이동 속도가 아니라 순간 이동을 마음대로 쓸 수 있는 원소술사를 원하는 건데 병신들이 이거. 에휴, 그쵸? 저와 생각이 다른 사람이 어디 있겠어요. 다 원소술사는 텔레포트 때문에 하는 건데.
procced off of all of your burning damage. So your burning damage could give you mana, and now it's going to just do it off of your pyromancy skills damage. So
만화
it's like
리젠이
your fireball,
야.
all of those other skills that aren't really fireball. I think that's good for that one.
블리자드를 사용하면
We've got the gloves of the
몇 초 동안
Illuminator.
20 몇 프로의 데미지 감소 막 이런 것도 있네. 이거는 저거죠?
Before, when you got this, it was kind of in a very weird place
Unique?
where the bounces could do it pretty often in such a way where you'd only hit an enemy once with the bounce. And we
장갑입니다,
had this damage
장갑. 이게
penalty
뭔지
on it
모르겠어요.
because, you can hit enemies multiple times.
일루미네이터?
And it's AoE and gives you a bunch of procs of all of your stuff. So
글러브
it's
오브 더
pretty strong.
일루미네이터가 뭔지 봐야 되겠어요.
But because you could only hit an enemy once, a lot of times this was just a damage nerf for your character.
Yeah, you'd bounce it one time on a monster, and
Yep.
that was that.
And
네,
now
그렇죠.
we-
다음
we've
패치
got
때
nerf
해주는
to
겁니다.
unique, right?
다음
That
패치
never
때.
feels good. So we reduced the distance that it bounces a little bit, so it should be more easy or easier to consistently hit an enemy twice. And then we also reduced that damage penalty, so now no matter what, if you hit an enemy twice,
데미지
it's a damage
페널티?
bonus. And then we also replaced one of its affixes from damage to stunned to lucky hit to restore resource. And since this thing, bounces and hits enemies a lot of time, the lucky hit procs are very powerful with this. So we think this will be a lot of fun for players. Alright,
아,
moving on to
넘어갔어.
Barbarian. So, like I said before, we're increasing the Fury generation of all of those basic skills. So you're just going to get more Fury in the early game so that you can, do that basic core skill loop a little more often, so it should be more fun. Double swings gain a damage buff, ruptures gain a damage buff, charges gain a damage buff, and one of the enhancements is increasing that vulnerable duration, so it should hopefully be more attractive.
One thing I do want to note is like even on the if we go back to the other slide, like
Sure.
a lot of people are going like Fury gain 11 to 13 and like
아,
10 to 13.
사실상
They're always, like,
체감이
that
되는
doesn't feel
거는
like a big number and so forth.
나와봐야
By
아는 건데.
percentage, it's really big.
Yeah, by
It
percentage,
also
it's actually
scales
really
with a
big.
whole lot of other stuff.
No,
It
not.
gets spooky when we do too much in a percent-wise.
Exactly. So I
Just
think
because of how everything works in our
I
game.
think people are
지금 가장 중요한
seeing
휘린드
some small numbers
언급은
and not
없네요.
realizing that, other things obviously it scales with other things and other and it mixes in with whether you other gear that you have and so forth. So
더블
this is
스윙
just a
지금도
baseline
괜찮은데 더
number.
좋아진다고요? 이거
And you
인기
have
좀
to
있겠는데?
remember that obviously when that number gets tweaked, everything else gets tweaked. That gets.
Want to point that out
mixes.
too when we do like damage increases, where it might seem small because it's increasing the base that everything else multiplies and scales on. It can be a bit. I mean, sometimes it's not as much. We can go and do it again, right?
제가
But
소선은
it's
잘
scary.
모르는데 그래도
So
야만은
we
잘
have to, think
알거든요
about that
이제.
because it's very easy to be like, oh, just make it 20, and now late game you're just like bashing once and then.
치약
using all
지속
your
시간
Fury
4초로
damage.
증가했다고?
Right.
So-
그래 4초 정도는 해줘야지.
All right, so violent upheaval. This one gives you berserking, and it used to be that you had to damage 2 or more enemies, or 3 or more enemies to get a better buff. And now we're adding bosses to that. So when you're in a boss fight, you're just going to be able to get and chain that berserking again, making it usable in a part of the game where it didn't use it.
뭐야.
We've also got gushing wounds. Is one I think worth calling out. This is the key passive. We're increasing the scaling of your bleed to crit damage, and then also your bleed damage when you overpower an enemy is going up significantly.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, so now when you overpower and get that AoE blood burst, it's actually going to do quite a bit of chunky damage, we're hoping. Walking Arsenal is another one worth
아,
pointing out here. We've
그
heard some
광폭화
feedback that,
데미지
two
상승이
cards buff
35로
all
늘었고
3 of your weapon types when you're doing Walking Arsenal.
기본
Usually
데미지
2 is
상승이.
fairly easy. You can like have a basic and a core that are
아,
done
이
with it, but getting that
패시브를
third
찍으면
one to consistently
광폭화
happen, especially if
데미지
you use
버프가
a skill like
내렸고.
charge or leap or something like that, it can be hard to maintain that. So
워킹 아스널.
we're just increasing it to make it more forgiving, which should also increase all of those legendaries and other
이런 건 필요
combos
없는데
and stuff.
That
데미지
was possible for me when I had
상승
death
지속
blow
시간.
charges, but whenever I was only running like one death blow charge at a time, like that build just didn't
Yeah,
really come
Death Blow is
online.
probably one of the more one of the easier ones.
그냥
to get,
어떤 뭐
even then it
특정
can go
메커니즘이
hard,
생기는 게
yeah.
아니라
This is great. It opens up a lot.
그냥 특정 메커니즘이 생기는 게 아니라 그냥 자체 스펙 상승을 그냥
The
수치화만
Unrelenting
건드려
Fury
놨어요.
here is one worth calling out, where again you're going to get a benefit when hitting bosses, so now it's useful in a part of the game.
이쯤에서 드는 생각인데 진짜 몸 많이 살린다라는 생각이 드네.
Aspect of, or 2 earthquake aspects there at the bottom, Vulkathos and Earthquake. We're increasing the amount of damage reduction and damage bonus. So if you want to do that Earthquake build, like I said before, we want those Earthquakes to do damage
뭔가-
and be meaningful. But in the meantime, while you're standing in them, those buffs on you are going to be a little bit more powerful. So hopefully we can incentivize people to go through that fantasy.
볼스 케이크?
All right, next, so uniques. We've got a lot of stuff here with
Oh.
barbarian uniques. Again, the kind of the high-level goal here is
오
we're
얘는
generally improving just
고유
the basic
수정이 많네요.
it does, and then also trying to replace an item stat that wasn't very attractive or not as attractive with one that we know players really like to make these meaningful for them.
10만
So Fields
보.
of Crimson, this is the one where you do blood pools when you rupture enemies. We're increasing the damage. We're increasing the damage that enemies take standing in pools, which is a pretty big buff. And then we're also changing the rupture
배틀
cooldown reduction,
트랜스가 뭐야?
which is crit strike
이거
damage.
지리는데?
Again, combine that with the bonus in the key passive where it complete
11 to
damage,
70, right?
where that scales better. That'll just be quite a bit more damage across the board.
라말라드니
we talked
이것도
Ramaladi's Magnum Opus, we're replacing the physical damage affix with vulnerable damage. 100,000 steps, the base affix of the boots, we're replacing the evade cooldown affix with just more evade.
라말라드니가
And then we're
상향이구나.
also replacing the damage against stun enemies with bonus movement speed. Which
잘
is
만든
because
카리언데
we
버려졌었는데
know how attractive
이게
this
한손검이거든요 라말라드니. 오,
Let's talk about.
sorry.
로그
we
도적
said,
얘기가 있네요.
that we were going to buff.
뭐야? 아
Sorceress
잘못
and
간
Barbarian.
거구나.
We're going to make some changes in
Yep.
111.
방송사고.
But Adam, you've been working on. We don't want to leave the other three classes out, right?
Yeah, totally.
Most of these changes are
다시 틀었어요,
that you've seen are for Sork and Barb. But I think we had some time to make some changes to the other classes.
We totally did, so we can go on here. One thing I do want to call out the focus of the
나왔네,
patch is
로그.
the Sorcerer or the Barbarian, so you're going to see a lot more for them, but we wanted to give the other classes something exciting as well. Rogues are actually, I think, eating pretty well right now, so they're pretty good, but we still found some things of underused things to buff. Probably one of the more big ones here is Forceful Arrow. We're changing the functionality here so that every time that you cast, third cast of the arrow just pierces all enemies.
야 이제 화살비가 첫 번째 웨이브에서
We got some feedback
적이
on
넘어지게
arrows
바뀌었네.
that it was kind of
두
weird that
번째
the second
웨이브였죠,
wave was the
아마도?
one that knocked all the enemies down, because a lot of times, you know, you cast a skill and the combat is in a certain state where the enemies are where you want to hit them and probably where you want to CC them because you usually want to group stuff up to CC them. But because it happens on the second
그리고
wave, you know,
독덕
first wave comes,
피해량이
does a little
늘었고.
damage to everything,
They all move.
and then they all move, and then everything goes and falls
헐트로프가
apart,
뭐지?
right? So this just makes it more reliable.
It sets itself up.
It sets
조금씩
itself up,
버프가
yeah,
됐어요.
exactly. Here, let me look if there's anything noteworthy. There's some buffs to things that are underused.
빅티마이즈.
So the aspect of elusive
Not-
menace
not
no longer requires his to be from close enemies. So again, we're just making things more
Oh,
generically
고유.
useful. And
Oh,
then
이렇게 빨리
for uniques,
넘어가.
kind of similar to Barbarian, we found some room here to make a couple stats replaced with things that we know are really attractive. So Wind Force, we replaced
Okay.
all stats affix with bonus full level
윈드
damage.
포스?
And then the Word of Hakan, we replace ultimate damage.
아. 데미지 2배 상승되는 그 바람살의
효과가
효과가 취약 피해가 적용이 된다 이런 소리인 것 같아요.
좋지.
드루이드? 근데 이렇게 내용을 이렇게 늘려놨냐? 그냥 진짜 쓸데없는 거 그냥 이력서에 한 줄 더 적기 이런 거 존나 해놨네.
And then same thing for Ravens, their passive damage is going up, and then Brutal Ravens is the one that gives you another little, a couple more little Ravens to go peck your enemies to death. They're also going to peck a little bit harder, so a little bit more.
야만 소서만 준비하면 아쉬울까봐
And
이렇게
then we're
해놨나?
also looking at Rabies. We know that Poison Druid, like just if I want to do pure Poison Druid, is a little bit behind, so we're really targeting Rabies.
고유가
A pretty meaty upgrade there in its damage. This will also, by the way, improve the legendary. I think it's legendary where your wolves can cast Rabies. That's also going to be improved by this.
영혼 소모 감소가 60에서 50으로 줄었네?
And then for legendaries and the class mechanic, we're just buffing some things that are a little bit underutilized, so they'll just be stronger. And then Necromancer, so here we've got quite a few things going on. Bone Spirit, this is the enhanced Bone Spirit, which is where when you crit enemies with
스피리트
Bone Spirit,
나왔네요.
you get cooldown reduction. We're increasing that from 6 to 7 seconds, so it should be a little more friendly to players in this current state of the game.
뼈 영혼 아무도 안
legendary
쓰죠.
upgrade here, this is the one where your shadow dot damage is going up, and we added a new way to
위상
scale
얘기
that
있고
damage in the legendary space.
정복자 얘기 있고
We got feedback that this really just wasn't scaling enough to be meaningful, even when you invested a lot into willpower. So now you're just going to get a lot more bang for your buck. You're going to do the requirement is less, so you're going to get more.
제압 피해
buffs.
종류예요. 제압 피해 종류. 정복자는 제압 피해밖에 없고.
And then also just your bonus damage.
그다음에 이건 뭐지?
So the
아 이것도 지속 피해류.
Empowering Reaper, we got some
맨
feedback
밑에
that
건
totally makes sense to me now, and a year ago me should have thought of this, but the way that this used to work was
행운의 적중 시 취약 적에 대한 정수 회복인데 이것도 버프됐네. 정수 회복은 지금 필요가 없는데 이제 더 이상. 아씨 근데 진짜 게임 안 해보고 만든다.
Turns out, crit doesn't work with dots at all. So that pool doesn't get scaled with the way that you make the pool. So it just doesn't work.
저게 최대 40이었을 거예요 아마. 30에서 50으로 바뀌었네.
So you just have to damage enemies to spawn those pools of light. So now this can actually be more friendly to dot builds.
이거는 아무도 안 하는 브라이트
this one used to have the same effect, but only when hitting vulnerable enemies with bone skills. So now you can just get we have a new resource mechanic for all the necromancer.
세버 이게 그거 거예요 아마 절단. 네.
And then here, let me see. Probably one of the big ones for quality, even though it's just a number buff, is Aspect of Torment. That essence regeneration was just woefully undertuned, so we increase it pretty significantly.
이게 뭐지?
Hulking aspects. This one, I'm hoping
데미지 인크리즈 25에서 45?
Looking at it now was a little weird because it doesn't actually give you resource. It's just cooldown reduction on the golem skill. So we're gonna move that to a utility. So now you can put this like on your boots and other places that you didn't have to. It doesn't have to take that
정수 회복.
for your to use.
뭐야 이거?
And then we're also
정수 회복이 20에서 30이었는데 90에서 170이라고?
And then for uniques, kind of similar to what I said before.
말이 안 되는데?
The empty tomb. We're changing the bonus intelligence affix to be replaced with bonus move speed, which I know is particularly
이거 왠지
necromancer players.
PS에도 할 수 있게 해놓는 것 같은데?
Well, yeah, well, necromancers they may want mobility a little bit. I heard.
Usually the slower individuals in the group. So
Yeah, helping them out a little bit. Here, this is a monster change, but it impacts minions really, so necromancer and druid. But these attacks now,
소환수.
Balrog and some elite affixes are going to be dealing reduced damage to necromancer minions and druid companions, so your pets will just die less often to these things. And then now we got some of our generic updates. We only have a couple of them. The first one is to a malignant heart. This is the caged heart of spell breaking. And this one used to say that when you took elemental damage, you gained damage resistance to that element, right? It was thematic to reducing only that element, but we found that was really, really narrow. Again, trying to open things up so it's not so narrowly useful that you're not gonna ever take it. So now it's just gonna give you just generic damage reduction when you take elemental.
원소 피해를 받으면 5초간
And then our last one
최대
here
20%의
for
받는
item
데미지
updates is
감소
severity.
이건데
So we got a lot of feedback
누가
on this
다
one.
심장
Explain if you
다
realize the game
공격으로
we thought that
챙기지.
this item was crazy, gonna be really, really good. But then we realized due to the stats on it that it just wasn't hitting the attractiveness that we wanted. So even though this terrifies me, we're gonna bump it up and see how it goes. But we're gonna replace the all stats affix with bonus max life. The barrier is now also gonna be scaling with your maximum life,
페널티
and it'll properly be working
All
with
stat
other
affix
barrier
replace the
legendaries.
max life
So,
with max life.
Need a barrier to do certain procs and things. This will not pop
Barrier
that
is
as well.
now best.
So we think this is going to be a
Oh.
pretty big buff to this item, and hopefully we'll see it in your like max life and increasing healing builds.
yeah, so we have a ton of
잠깐만, 이거
updates
말이
on
돼?
the classes.
Yeah, a lot of
that we
stuff.
literally
Lot of
just went
stuff.
through. It's quite an almost like an encyclopedia of
잠깐만요.
stuff that especially on the barb and sorcerer classes. But I will say that it's nice that we got some stuff in for the
얘네
rogue
씨 부리는 동안 저
and
잠깐
druid,
그
players as well.
이
Making sure that
자체
we kind of,
그
like,
해석
built up some
대조
more
좀
understanding
해볼게요.
that we had seen.
Actually, one more caveat to all of that. I should have said this at the beginning. It's not final yet.
Not final
This
yet.
is
어,
planned.
내용을
The odds are very high. We do 90% of it or most of it, maybe even all. But
정리 진짜
as
못한다
we get
얘네.
into the weeds of things and we're updating things, some things may change. So this is our plan. It's very likely it'll be at least most of it, if not all of it. But it's not completely in the game yet. So
There might be
We-
some number tweaks. basically.
Yeah, we always add a small caveat just because things are still going through testing right now on our side,
correct.
and we
It's
want to
going
make
through
sure.
testing, all that stuff.
Yeah,
so
we want to make sure we're not completely.
I'm very careful. I always caveat, not final till you see it in the game.
Adam's
but-
being very cautious about
Yes.
it.
I am very
It's not
cautious
going to be, you're not going to experience something that's totally different from what you just
That's
saw.
right. That's
No,
also
it'll
why we're
be
not
close.
releasing patch notes today. We're going to actually discuss when patch notes be released
We will,
later on
yeah.
the stream. So
Yes.
we'll reveal that.
And one thing I do want to note is like there, because I'm seeing this like a little bit in chat, and people are
Yeah.
going like, hey, you guys are adjusting some tweaks with like, for instance, like druid summons and their minions. Same thing with like there's a lot of questions about like, hey, what's the overall plan on like minion builds and so forth in the future? Is that something you guys are still going to want to work on, look at in the future?
I
This
can
is
talk
not
about
just
this
a-
for a very long time. Yes, Druid and Necromancer are a little bit different, so I guess I'll talk Necromancer first. So necromancer minions is absolutely a core fantasy of necromancer.
좀 전에 마지막으로 뜬 게 그 고유 아이템에 있는 모든 능력치를 생명력과 보호막으로 대체한다는 소리였어요. 왜? 모든 능력치 좋은데?
Have AI, they have a passive and active component to them typically. There's a lot going on. So in this patch, we're not touching the necromancer stuff a lot. It is on the team's radar of looking at the ways that they scale, looking at the ways that things proc with them, looking at just the combination of passive versus active activity that we want the player to do there. So there's definitely a lot going on there. We are thinking about it. There will be stuff coming, but no promises on when. But we are.
사실 우리는 제일 그 관심 있는 게 아이템에 이제 그 뭐 재사용 대기 시간 이런 건 안 건드린다고 하긴 했는데 몬스터 맵팩 사이즈 증가 뭐 이런 거 그런 내용이 제일 중요한데 그 얘기는 아직 안 나왔어요.
The Druid does it better, right? So that was something that we contended with a lot. I'm sure that we're going to flex on that over time. We did add support. We still love companions on Druid, and we will absolutely be making it more of a thing, hence why we're buffing them a lot in this patch. But we are careful about the design space and the fantasy of the different classes, right? We don't want all the classes to be exactly the same because then you don't feel different when you're playing. You don't have new interesting mechanics that are between them. We talk about that a lot on the team. It's very easy to be like, hey, just this class doesn't have this and it's fun, give it to all the others, right? I think Necromancer and move speed is part of that, where we overcorrected a little bit, where like we didn't want them to have a teleport or dash, right, like a rogue. If Necromancers are dashing around everywhere, that's a weird fantasy, right? But not giving them enough movement speed options at all, I think, is something that we're coming back on.
Yeah.
So, but it's a push and pull, right? It's on a spectrum of how far do we go to go into another class's fantasy or an archetype that doesn't make sense fantasy-wise versus keeping true to the core and finding clever ways to fix it, or we can't fix it and we do need to bend a little bit. And
Yeah,
it's always a conversation.
It's also interesting to see that the feedback, particularly on Druid companions, like we knew that they were really cool, but like the number of Druid players who are looking for more ways to kind of make more companion-focused builds is maybe a little bit higher than we expected.
Yes.
So this is one of those situations where, like, kind of in response to the fact that players are really hoping, like, Druid players are looking to go after this fantasy of like, I am the master of the animal kingdom, and I'm going to have all these and nature, right? I'm going to have all these buddies with me. I think it's kind of like moving our hand a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, actually there is something really cool here. There is fantasy here for us to really latch onto and more that we can do. But to Adam's point, it's still very important we make sure that the Necromancer feels distinct and the Druid feels distinct after these changes go in.
Correct. It's the eternal struggle for us on class design.
Sure.
Yeah. We also have a lot of like quality of life items that we wanted to talk about that we actually kind of hit on last week when we were talking.
이제 맨 오른쪽 아저씨가 정리하고 우리가 기다리는 정보로 넘어가려나 봐요 이제.
Talk a little bit more about those here. I know we have some changes coming for like monster density, for instance.
Yeah, I want to talk about monster density. So we've said a few times now that we're going to increase monster density in Nightmare Dungeons and Helltides. The changes are in 1.1.1, like we said last week. And I think we have an image of an example of a Nightmare Dungeon. This is how it is today. If you go into Nostravus Deepwood, of course, monsters are going to not be exactly like this, but this is an example of it. And then in 1.1.1, it's going to change, so you can see a lot more monsters.
노스트라바 깊은 숲 악몽
This
던전이죠.
is really going back to, we talked about our mission statement for the live game.
몬스터의 분포도를
After
보여주는
you've
것 같아요.
achieved your build, being able to go in and mow down large numbers of enemies, deal with large numbers of enemies. That's sort of a core part of an ARPG. We want to make sure that we're delivering, especially in the end game content.
전과 후를
That's
보여준
how
것
we
같아요
look at
지금.
Nightmare Dungeons. On Helltide, we've been doing the same thing.
지옥
increasing
물결.
density. As I said last week, there are some areas of Helltide that are highly dense, and we want to make sure that all of our players across all of the different platforms that we support can enjoy this increase to density. So it's not just the people with the absolute top-end equipment. So we've also been making sure that as we bump up these densities, that we're doing it in a way that performance stays reasonable. So you can actually, like, if we bump up density and then the game turns into a slideshow, we didn't actually make the game more fun. even though there are a lot of monsters, so it needs to stay performant at the same time. So we've been working on that at the same time, so that we can really hit that target. And this is something too that, you know, when 1-1 comes, 1-1.
1-1-1.
We gotta have like
Triple one.
we gotta have a different name for these patch notes. For these patches, it's fine. It's fine. When that comes out, we're going to be looking at the density there and seeing how close it comes to this mission statement, this goal, right? And if it's not hitting this goal, then we're going to keep working toward that goal. So we really want to make sure that it's capturing that fantasy of mowing down hordes of enemies.
Yeah, it's a great goal for us to line ourselves around too, right? So once we're able to capture more data from players on live, we can see how players with different like PC specs are able to interact in these spaces. It's going to continue to inform us and let us do more and more double downs on these decisions as we go.
And then I
너무
know we have,
빨라서
some changes
못 보신
coming,
분들을 위해서
in
제가
regards
잠깐
to bosses and so forth as well.
That's right. So we didn't talk about this last week, but we have gotten a lot of feedback before about the about players, particularly like in World Tiers 3 and 4, fighting like dungeon bosses and world bosses, and being able to go in there with their enhanced power. Now they've got like some uniques online. Their
좀 이따
builders can come
정리할게요 한번
online,
다시.
and they've got like a lot of like damage to vulnerable targets. You know, like they're mowing through some of these bosses faster than we expect, right? So, or rather, fast enough that's not really challenging and not really engaging. So we are boosting the health of bosses in World Tiers 3 and 4, you know, at brackets as you're kind of going up the experience. But you know, in exchange for this, in exchange for making some of these pieces just a little bit harder as players are going through them, we are also going to be making a change to the rewards that you get going through these.
Yeah.
So now, like after 1.1.1 goes live, dungeon bosses starting at level 35 even. So this is before you can get into World Tiers 3 and 4, and then it's the so once you've done that, or once you've killed those, you're going to have a guaranteed legendary item drop in that space. And that's going to carry up as well into World Tiers 3 and 4. When you complete a Legion event, that's going to also give you a guaranteed.
군단 이벤트를 할 때도 뭔가 특별한 걸 주고자 한다. 뭐 이런 식인 것 같아요. 지금 방금 얘기는. 군단 이벤트 우리 다 버렸죠. 랩업 구간, 초반 구간 아니면. 아까는 조금 전에는 그 맵팩 사이즈 늘렸다고 하면서 그 지옥 물결도 언급했었고.
A while ago, where I basically just said like you know, what do you think is the chance in which a treasure goblin will drop a legendary item? And I said it was like, you know, 10%, 25%, 40%, 50% with the 4 options. The majority of players or voters, I should say, right, all selected 10% was the chance, and everybody had their own, you know, their feelings on it as they were kind of going through it. But the reality is at level, and I said level 50 treasure goblin as part of this. But the reality is they have a 50% chance to drop legendary items today, and that's like going back to like level 35. They've got a very, very high chance to drop legendary items, but
So what you're saying is sometimes I kill a treasure goblin and it doesn't drop a legendary item.
그래서 조단님 언제요?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So basically, if you flip a quarter every 25 minutes, you know, that's basically your chance to get a legendary item when you're fighting treasure goblins in the overworld. And it's very easy to have like tails 5 times in a row, and then
that's what happens to me every time.
And as humans, we are 7 times more likely to remember a negative thing than a positive thing. So this is nothing wrong with rather there's nothing wrong with the player's perception of treasure goblins not feeling rewarding. You don't see them that frequently relative to other content types, and when you don't get a legendary item from something called a treasure goblin, that can feel bad. So what we decided to do is we've gone back and said, starting right at level 15 for treasure goblins, 15, they have a guaranteed legendary item drop chance when you kill one from that point forward. So now when you see treasure goblins on the map, you start hearing them
너무 어렵다.
in the corners of your screen.
내정지
You know
온다.
you need to go fight that thing. You need to take it out. You need to get a legendary item from it. That happens very, very early. So we think that's going to be like a really fun like update to kind of help get these things across. 50% isn't useful in this case. 100%, absolutely. We want you to feel like you're getting that power.
50%
No more
fun.
coin flip. No more coin flip.
Yeah. Actually,
And
probably more than 50% more fun.
I will
Say
note,
100%
Joe missed a wonderful opportunity to drag in Gabi, the goblin.
Oh,
the treasure goblin.
into the frame.
Should I try
We have
to
a
pull
plush
this in?
treasure goblin just off screen.
We have a very large plush.
Here's
There he
this
is.
giant treasure
There
goblin
he is.
that
Look-
absolutely doesn't fit on camera
Look
at
how
all.
happy he is.
And
that
now
he-
he's off
Happy
camera
to
He's
give
again.
you
legendary.
loot now.
Staring at Joe as he's literally talking
We
about.
have a lot of other stuff to discuss.
Staring at Joe
Very
as he's
important.
literally talking about killing him.
true.
So yeah.
Yep.
They're happy to be of help.
It is a plush creature. So yeah.
I know, and so we talked more about, or you actually, when we were on the stream last
Yeah.
week. Sorry, bleh, about 2 weeks in a row, you guys. We talked about respecs and
Yeah.
so forth. So I know that is also coming in.
Yeah,
in 1.1.
we just want to confirm that the stuff we said last week, we're going to reduce respec cost by 40%. Players are going to get an extra stash tab, and Elixir stat count is going to go up to 99.
Yeah, and the stash tab is just purchasable by
That's
gold.
right. So
So
Yeah.
that's just to make sure people
That's
don't think
right.
we're just
Yeah.
selling it.
Tab 1's 100K, Tab 2's
Yeah.
200K, Tab 3's 300K, Tab 4's going to be 400K.
Yeah.
So you can buy that for your seasonal stash and for your eternal stash.
Yes, exactly. And then
창고
one
얘기하는
other
것 같아요.
thing
창고
that, we
압박.
did want to talk about because
그거.
this was a question that came up last week in regards to like the leaving dungeon options and like teleporting out of dungeons and so forth. And I know you wanted to talk more about that here today.
아까 던전 앞에 텔레포트하는 그 얘기는 왜 지금 들먹이는지.
So clear.
There's a loop there. I don't know why anyone's confused. This is very clear. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to change it back to 3 seconds.
Yes.
Basically, the reason that we increased this is we have, in Diablo 4, we have a mechanic where when you're casting some kind of spell or power and you get hit by some damage, you don't get interrupted immediately. You have to take about 5% of your health and damage before it gets interrupted. And this makes things like town portaling back to town, leave dungeon, etc. feel a lot better.
Saving a prisoner.
Saving a prisoner, absolutely,
Oh,
yeah.
Every time.
So if you're taking like really incidental damage, it's not going to get interrupted. But we were worried about a case where you're in the middle of a high intensity combat fight or in the middle of a boss fight, and we felt like it was a little bit too easy to get out of that in terms, and that's actually what it's referring to the loop, which again, I felt like I nailed it, but I guess you know, and so, you know, there are other ways that we could have solved that, right? We could have said like, oh well, you get pushed back.
제가 아까 그 놓친 내용 중에 월드보스 있죠? 그 주간 월드보스라고 생긴 그 그냥 진짜 레이드 보스 걔네랑 그 지옥 물결에 있는 킥사르트까지 포함해서 걔네를 잡으면 고유 아이템 걔네를 더 강력하게 하고 고유 아이템 확률을 대폭 늘린다 뭐 이런 얘기가 있었다고 합니다.
Everyone, so
I've got one more bonus thing to talk about too. So, so we've been getting a lot of feedback, obviously, on the end game experience, tiers 3 and 4, and you know, Nightmare Dungeons are a really big part of that. Last week we talked about how we were going to be ensuring that the Nightmare Dungeon difficulty was scaled more appropriately.
Right.
So now, like, you know, the tier 70 difficulty was the old version. Rather, the old version of tier 70 is now the tier 100 after the changes that we made to more accurately reflect the balance we have in Diablo 4 versus the kind of insane overtuned stuff we had prior for the tier 70 plus content. One other thing that we obviously are thinking about, like, you know, the scaling difficulty is one part of this, you know, but we also get plenty of feedback on some of the Nightmare Dungeon affixes themselves. And we know that some of these are sort of ones you're going to want to basically throw in the trash right away. So you're going to want to salvage these and get Citadel Dust immediately upon when some of these things kind of pop up. So a couple of the ones that we're actually going to be, for now, we're going to be removing a few of these as we think about reworking them or deciding what we want to do with them. But we're going to be taking these out in 1.1.1. They're not going to appear anymore. That is, so the first is Resource Drain. It's not going to be showing up in Nightmare Citadels anymore. Cold Enchanted is not going to be showing up in Nightmare Citadels anymore for a bit. And then Backstabber is being removed as well as part of 1.1.1. Now, this is not by any means an exhaustive list of the things we'd want to like adjust on the affix side. You know, there's lots more that we want to do to kind of improve this experience. This is just sort of like while we're in here beginning to look at these things, we know that these are problematic. We have adjustments we want to make anyway. We want to go ahead and pull these out and just make the experience better today for players.
Yep. Cool. Awesome to hear. I know that a lot of players have been giving feedback about specific Nightmare Dungeon affixes and everything. So it's great that we've been able to jump on a few of the ones that we know are problematic. with the community and kind of pull them out and reevaluate and see what we can end up doing with those. So we did, obviously we talked about the date for the patch notes beforehand.
I don't know what you mean.
But we do want to specify that we are going to be releasing patch notes, full patch notes next week. It's actually going to be on August 2nd next week on Wednesday. We'll be releasing full patch notes. And then 111 is going to be coming out on August 12th, which is Tuesday. So players will... Did I get those dates right? Yes. I'm doing this by memory.
뭐야 8월
By
12일이라고?
memory.
No idea.
I've seen so many
어,
calendars.
미친
and
새끼 아니야.
this is the last day.
Tuesday after.
Oh, sorry. It is no. I
I
lied.
think it's
It
not
is
the
August 8th.
Yeah.
See, this is dates. Just
Everything's
flying
a
through
blur
my
right
head.
now.
August 8th.
Sorry, August 2nd is when the patch notes will be coming out
Yeah.
in full, and then
Ah.
August 8th is when the patch will actually hit. Sorry, I apologize. I've had a lot of dates in my head over the
8월
past couple of days.
2일이랍니다. 8월 2일.
Yeah, buff the
Buff
date.
the dates.
That's
Just
also
like
part of the
Twitter
patch notes. So players will be able to see everything next Wednesday. We'll be posting those, so make sure to stay tuned. Of course,
8월
on
2일이랍니다.
the,
8월 2일.
Diablo social media, etc. will end up updating the patch notes there, so players can see it. Just remember, the patch is not that day. We're just posting the notes early so that players can actually see them. This goes back to exactly how we were talking about that we want to better communicate these notes here, similar to how we're doing this here on this campfire chat. And then, of course, August 8th is when the patch will end up going live.
그리고
for all
중요한
players.
내용을 제가 흘렸는데 그 후방 몬스터가 후방에서 공격할 시 데미지 150% 증가랑 원거리 몬스터 적중 시 자원 그 만화번 시키는 거 그거 인장 어픽스 삭제했대요. 삭제할 예정이래요. 인벤토리 골드 주고 더 늘릴 수 있고.
Last week, as we're waiting for questions to kind of come in, was about XP in later game, or for late game players and stuff like that. Do we have any update and in regards to that specific topic?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we did talk about this last week, and what we said then was that, you know, we are not looking to make the game feel slower.
아 적용은
Explain.
explain.
Like XP gain rate in response to like feedback about some of the changes that we had made. You know, the goal was really we want to make sure the players are having a good time progressing through World Tiers 3 and 4. not
저는
feeling
지금부터
like
정리를 해야 될 것 같은데 얘네
really
언제까지
difficult to make
시부릴까?
progress. So in response to some of these thoughts, we had gone through and we had raised the amount of experience that you gain from like before the 1.1 patch. When we raised the amount of experience gain you get from Nightmare Dungeon completion, from Helltide Cache opening,
Right.
From Whisper completion. Like we went and did a good buff on those activities to make them feel juicier as part of that. And now we're going through and we're updating density inside the Nightmare Dungeons and in
It's gonna
Helltide areas
increase.
as well.
아이,
Yeah, so all this to say, we are committed to increasing the speed at which the players will be progressing through these later world tiers. We're not happy with the speed at which players are getting through some of this content and the kinds of behavior it's incentivizing as a result of that, right? We want to make sure that players feel that they can play the way that they want and they can progress at a decent pace. But now that we've made a number of these changes, we do want to see what the impact's going to be on the overall XP gain rate across the board for players and just seeing how different kinds of players are progressing. So that when we go through and we make changes, which we will be making soon, I think probably likely for Season 2, when we go through and we make these changes, that's going to be informed by what we see players going through and what their experience is like now.
Yeah,
So it's really just a question of like how much are we going to make adjustments, like what's going to feel right, and that's going to be based on like what we see from players.
We have two people actually asking pretty similar questions, but one was specifically calling out Adam Jackson and his thoughts on this, but
Oh, boy.
but they both are very similar questions. One is from Febzilla, the other one's from Karnaga.
I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in really
Yes.
quick? Can I ask chat a question? Do you, yes or no?
가장
do
중요한
you
것부터
want
정리를 해야
Adam
되겠다.
to read the names of people that he's getting the questions from. in chat?
I think we
That
should.
Adam.
Yes.
Okay, he's saying he should. Okay.
I think we should, just because I don't want to go into that whole situation, like
Oh,
where
fine.
that other outlet
Okay,
made up names, and we don't do that. So,
Sure.
But Karnaga and Febzilla, they both ask about. People are all like, "Whoa!"
I knew it. I knew it.
Well,
on Honestly, it would make my job so much easier.
I know.
I wish I
Please
could.
finish your
Well,
question.
we're gonna
Sorry.
read these at least.
Read
but,
these,
The question is about crowd control.
Okay.
Obviously,
Yeah.
it is a huge and popular topic amongst the community. What are our thoughts about crowd control? What are we planning on doing about that here in the future?
I bet we all have thoughts on that, actually.
We do, yeah.
Yes.
Let me
You
just
can
say
jump on that,
first
yeah.
that we think that as you get into situations where there are lots of monsters on screen and high-end areas where the amount of damage that you're seeing going in and out is really high, so you're having to react really quickly. Situations where you're being hard CC'd, or like stun or freeze or something like that, can be much more impactful than they are when the intensity and the pace of combat is lower. And so we want to make changes to CC to make that experience more fun.
다 끝나고 제가 정리 한번
We want to do
할게요.
that. It's not in 1.1.1, but those are changes that we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's larger CC stuff that we're discussing internally that we want to kind of pair with a few other big changes we have planned this year.
In fact, we're working on stuff like that for that right now.
Yeah.
There is a question here regarding it's my favorite question because I always get this. It's from Cookie Drops. So are you guys planning on addressing the issues related to like the imperfectly balanced on Necromancer, the decrep aura on Necromancer, and those are addressed in 1.1.1.
Yeah, we fixed it.
Those are we just didn't list all the bug fixes and stuff
There's
like
a
that.
whole lot of bug fixes.
Yeah, so you guys will see those
That's
with the final notes and everything, but those are addressed in this specific update, and it's something that I know a lot of people have been asking, going like, well, I can only add 1 point, yet it says I can add 3, and so forth. So most definitely being addressed in that. We've actually just been getting a general decent amount of questions related to resistances and what the intent is going to be with resistances here in the future. There's a ton of questions, so lots of names. But
Sure, yeah.
I guess like what's the vision
Sure.
on resistances here
Yeah,
in the future?
I talked about it a little bit. The vision is kind of, I think, what the standard vision of most games is, which is everything is impactful and meaningful and feels good, and you invest and get rewarded for those things at all times. But, you know, reality is a little bit harder than that, but that is kind of the North Star and what we're trying to do. The idea is that when you invest in elemental resistances, you will notice a difference in the damage that you take. We don't want just, you know, armor or damage reduction or any, like, king stat that is just way better than everything else. That's the only thing we care about. It is tough to find a perfect balance there of how impactful some things should be versus others, and then communicate certain kinds of combat when you max things out or really focus on only one thing. And there's a lot of gray area there that we're talking about, but our goal is that, and when we go and really take a deep dive at it, is one, we don't want you to just stack armor and that's better than everything else. We don't want you to stack just like general damage resistance and that's just better than everything else. We want elemental resistances to be meaningful, but we also don't want to get to a place where, you know,
드루이드는 변경점이 뭐가 있었죠?
and you stack all fire resistances and it actually can't hurt you. Right? There's always a push and pull in this one.
The inverse of that is actually also really dangerous, which is that you're wandering through the game, you don't always know the kinds of creatures or affix, obviously, you don't know the kinds of affixes you're dealing with. You've got 0% poison resistance, and you get basically one tick from like a level 60 poison creature kills you.
Sure.
Right, it's like there's a balancing act. The team is, you know, as we move forward, everything that
진짜
is 100%
정신없다.
accurate. We want to make sure that the choices between like armor for mitigation, for damage resistance based on passives, legendary powers, you know, blitz and paragon nodes, those things are impactful, and that resistance plays a really, really important role. The big difference here is that resistance is a thing that you are going to stack and earn separately, and that they are usually tied to affixes or inherent affixes on rings and jewelry. So it means that some players will go and encounter situations where they are not going to have a predictable amount of resistance when they go into an encounter, which means that we just need to think about what that is going to feel like for that player and imagine a world where they are able to still complete the content, but it's much more effective to have the appropriate amount of resistance. We need to make that feel impactful. So there's going to be situations where we are going to ensure that if you are getting into a predictable fight against a creature that you know is dealing a certain kind of damage and you don't have resistance in mind when you go into that fight, you're going to be penalized for that. That's going to be a really, really difficult situation.
이제 할 말 없잖아.
But we
그만하자.
are, you know, trying to balance this against the general flow of Diablo 4 as it stands today, as opposed to trying to like remake it into an entirely different experience.
Right. And to sort of get to I think the point of the question, the question there.
그 질문 답변 받는 거라 지금부터 그냥 이 내용은 중요한 내용은 이미 다 나온 것 같아서 정리를 한번 해볼게요. 잠시만. 조금 이거 좀 조정 좀 해야겠다. 지금 내용 보면은 요약하면 딱 요거거든요. 아 이걸 여기다 맞춘 다음에 요겁니다. 조금 찌그러졌는데 몬스터 팩 사이즈 증가가 돼서 드디어 핵앤슬래시 게임이 됐어요. 어떻게 알 수 있냐 보니까 몹팩 사이즈가 증가된 거를 직접 보여줬어요. 보면 이런 식으로 뭐야? 왜 안 나와 이거? 미친. 다시. 왜 이거 안 나올까? 아 정리를 하고 싶은데 그냥 윈도우 캡처 화면 캡처로 해야 되겠다. 안 나와. 잠시만요. 디스플레이 캡처로 아예 잡아버릴게요. 요런 식으로 요런 식으로 늘려줬습니다. 다시 처음부터 갈게요. 저 요걸로 바로 영상 만들 거라서 패치 1.11 패치는 가장 중요한 거 1.1.1 패치는 내용이 8월 2일 정확히 공개되며 8월 9일 적용됩니다. 적용되는 내용을 5가지로 간단하게 요약할 수가 있어요. 첫 번째 가장 중요한 거 몬스터 팩 사이즈 증가. 드디어 핵앤슬래시 게임이 되었다. 뚜벅뚜벅 걸어다니는 시간이 대폭 줄었고 우리가 처음에 어떻게 했죠? 애니카에서 용사 플러스 에리두 갔다가 그 다음에 눈먼굴 갔죠? 지금은 사라트 가고 있어요. 이게 다 뭐죠? 그냥 몬스터가 많이 나오고 경험치가 많이 먹을 수 있는 곳으로 다녔다 요 말인데 이제는 요런 식으로 이게 지금 노스트라바 깊은 숲인데 원래는 좌측처럼 요런 식으로 이게 지금 몬스터 분포도예요. 근데 보면 중간중간에 구멍이 있어요. 근데 우측 보면 이제 바뀔 노스트라바 깊은 숲입니다. 보면은 구멍이 별로 없어요. 몬스터가 꽉 들어찬 모습. 아주 바람직한 패치 같아요. 자, 다음 모든 직업의 상향. 이미 강한 빌드는 현상 유지가 되었고 너프된 거 없습니다. 잘 안 쓰이는 부분의 위주로 기술, 지속기술, 정복자, 전설, 위상, 고유 아이템 등 전체적 상향이 있었어요. 야만 이중 타격 그리고 원소술사의 화염 속성, 파이어볼 이런 얘기를 굉장히 많이 한 것 같아요. 특히 그냥 단순히 데미지만 늘려주는 것이 아닌 그 자원 수급도 되게 많이 편하게 용이하게 좀 버프를 해준 것 같아요. 이 부분은 자 잠깐 여기서 잠깐 끊어가고 그 다음에 됐고 여기서 잠깐만요. 뭐야? 이걸 어떻게 할까? 이걸 어떻게 보여줄까? 아무튼 이거는 패스하겠습니다. 어쨌든 전체적으로 상향이 된 거고 그 다음에 3번 세 번째 내용 월드보스가 더 강력해진다. 이 부분을 언급할 때 아샤바의 이제 3종 그 월드 퀘스트로 뜨는 그 월드보스를 포함해서 헬타이드 지옥물결 사령관 킥스타르트가 더 강해지며 드랍되는 아이템 위력이 높을 확률이 증가하고 고유 드랍 확률이 증가한다. 얘네가 좀 지금은 우리가 가면은 뼈창 한둘 있으면 그냥 시작하자마자 10초 안에 녹아요. 10초가 뭐야? 5초 만에 녹을 때도 있어요, 진짜. 그래서 더 강력해지고 아이템이 더 좋은 아이템이 드랍할 확률이 증가한대요. 여기서 아마 또 고유 아이템 몇 개 뜨기 시작하면은 또 좋은 패치가 되겠죠. 누가 여기서 샤코 먹었다더라. 이러면 또 우리가 게임 내에 할 컨텐츠가 늘어나는 거니까. 이거 지금 거의 안 하고 있었잖아요, 월드보스도. 이런 식으로 해서 요거는 이제 그 얘네가 개발자 스트리밍에서 보여준 무슨 자료 같은 게 없었습니다. 아쉽게. 어쨌든 내용은 확실히 있었고. 자, 그 다음에 네 번째 내용, 창고를 더 늘릴 수 있게 되었다. 이게 우리가 심장 종류만 해도 4가지예요. 지금 그 색깔이 분홍색, 오렌지색, 파란색, 까만색 이렇게 4개가 있는데 심장을 언제 쓸지 모르고 어떤 클래스보다 다른 부캐할 때 또 쓸지도 모르고 막 이러다 보니까 창고 압박이 너무 심한 거죠. 기존에도 우리가 그 전설 위상을 공용 위상 또 잘 안 나오는 것들 이런 거 때문에 좀 압박을 많이 느꼈었죠. 근데 이제 골드로 구매 가능한 창고 칸 증가를 언급을 했습니다. 근데 아쉽게 이게 상당히 중요한데 아쉽게 지금 당장 이 8월 9일에 적용된다는 확답이 없었어요. 이거는 차후에 계획 중이다라는 식으로 얘기를 했다고 합니다. 제가 이 부분은 정확하게 못 들어서 아무튼 그 다음에 보물고블린에 대해 어필을 했는데 사실상 보물고블린은 이제 15레벨 이상의 캐릭터에게 발견이 돼요. 근데 자신의 레벨이 35 플러스 35 이상 그러면 50레벨이겠죠? 그러면 이게 만약에 이렇게 된다고 하면 25레벨부터 선조 아이템이 드랍이 되는 거죠. 전설 아이템이 확정으로 드랍되고 사실상 근데 보물고블린은 디아3에서 좀 배워야 됩니다. 그리고 제가 여기 안 적은 내용이 있는데 던전 나가기 이제 5초에서 3초로 롤백 되었다고 합니다. 이게 사람들이 엄청 중요하다고 생각하더라고요. 아무튼 간에 쓸데없이 근데 여기서 지금 좀 아쉬운 게 6번에서 아쉬운 게 이건 언제 1번 자 심장 클릭 시 딜레이 이거 없애줘야 됩니다. 상당히 불편해요. 심장 클릭하면 심장 클릭도 오브젝트 클릭도 잘 안 돼요. 너무 작아가지고 오브젝트가 좀 크게 됐으면 좋겠어. 제가 무슨 뭐 노안이 있는 것도 아닌데 진짜 불편합니다. 이거 심장 클릭 시 몬스터 출현 딜레이를 좀 줄여주고 심장 오브젝트를 좀 크게 해줬으면 좋겠습니다. 그리고 이번은 현재 그 복사 관련 내용이 많아요. 골드 복사, 아이템 복사, 그리고 심장 복사 뭐 이런 것도 굉장히 많은데 이 부분에 대해서는 지금 아마 전수조사 중이겠죠? 그 뭐 악용자를 제재할 필요까지는 없더라도 문제를 빨리 막기는 해야 될 거 아니에요? 그래야 이제 다들 클린한 게임을 즐길 수 있으니까. 자, 오늘 개발자 스트리밍에서 말한 내용은 여기까지입니다. 근데 재밌는 그 채팅창 반응이 있었습니다. 채팅창 반응 첫 번째 패스 오브 엑자일 컨 대기방이라고 드립치는 양키들이 많았습니다. 뭔 말이냐면 패스 오브 엑자일이라는 게임에 니네들은 안 된다. 여기 패스 오브 엑자일 그러니까 패스 오브 엑자일의 엑자일컨이라는 그 게임 발표회가 있어요. 얘네가 이제 그 패스 오브 엑자일 2 그리고 패스 오브 엑자일 모바일 그리고 패스 오브 엑자일 차기 리그 8월달 리그를 발표하기 위한 엑자일콘이 잠시 후 오전 7시에 시작이 돼요. 그러다 보니까 양키들이 와가지고 디아블로를 까내리려고 여기 패스 오브 엑자일컨 대기방이다 이런 드립을 치더라고요. 그러니까 이게 무슨 말이냐면 양키들에게도 인식이 안 좋다. 다들 아시겠지만. 그리고 두 번째는 내 건 언제 상향? 이런 말이 굉장히 많았어요. 내 건 언제 상향? 그리고 복사 언제 잡을 거냐? 또 인장 무한런 이거 언제 잡을 거냐? 언제 고칠 거냐? 이런 내용들이 많았습니다. 자, 오늘 발표는 개발자 스트리밍은 그래도 내용이 좀 있었어요. 저번에는 그냥 그랬는데 그나마 조금 정신 차리진 거 아닐까 싶습니다. 왜냐면 몬스터 팩 사이즈 증가, 그리고 창고 더 늘릴 수 있게 해주고, 안 쓰이는 직업들 상향해주고, 뭐 이런 느낌이라. 그러면 1.11 개발자 스트리밍 내용은 여기까지 정리하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 까지. 오케이, 됐습니다. 오케이, 이거 뭐야? 됐어. 잠시만요. 저 이 영상화 좀 시키려고. 혹시 궁금하신 거 있으세요? 좀 늦게 오셔서 못 들었다. 뭐 얘네들 아직도 씨부리고 있는데 한번 또 들어보죠. 아직도 뭐 얘기하고 있네. 어이구. 아 뭐야, 끝났네. 에이, 꺼져. 근데 아직 멀었어요. 아직 멀었어. 혹시 지금 방송을 보고 계신 분들 중에 일단은 게임을 키겠습니다. 방송을 보고 계신 분들 중에 다음 패스 오브 엑자일 다음 리그가 시작되면 재밌을 것 같은데 요런 생각 정도 가지고 계신 분 없나요? 아니면 해보셨다거나. 저는 이제 디아랑 병행을 할 예정이거든요. KK님, 잔잔바리님 안녕하세요. 인사가 늦었네요. 중요한 내용만 얘기해도 뭐 저 금방 방송 리방 좀 하고 오겠습니다. 리방 하고 와도 되죠? 딱 두 분만 허락해 주시면 바로 갔다 오는데. 다 주무시고 계시겠죠? 생존자 계십니까? 안 계시면 갔다 오겠습니다.